For those out there listening that are unfamiliar with the term Atlantis, can you reveal a little bit about it? Tell them what Atlantis is before we get into your research.
Well, it's a mythical continent, which means, and myths don't mean it didn't exist. It means that what we believe about it has been embellished a little bit over time. So Atlantis is a legendary or mythical continent said to have existed approximately, or been destroyed about 10,000 years ago. We'll just use that as a round figure. So actually it's 11, now it's 12,000 years ago, since it was roughly 9600 BC that it sank. The story originally comes from the Greek philosopher Plato, who wrote it down around 355 BC. And 355 BC was 2,365 years ago. So he wrote two stories, one called Critias, the other one Timaeus. And in those stories, he told about this island empire out into the Atlantic, which became very advanced. And remember now, 10,000 or 12,000 years ago, 10,000 BC, it's believed by archaeologists that man could not cross the oceans. They don't even believe they had boats that could even go along the coastlines until recently. Now they accept they probably had little hide-covered boats. But supposedly they couldn't travel very far. They were all hunters and gatherers. There was no real civilization at the time, and man had no agricultural ability. So he basically was a hunter and a gatherer. But Plato said this advanced continent existed, that it had agriculture, that it had really advanced technology for the time. They had chariots, they had horses, it had elephants. It was a lush land, and he called it an island empire. And he said it was out beyond. Remember, he was in Greece, so the Mediterranean was the sea to them. The Straits of Gibraltar represented what they called Hercules. They were the Pillars of Hercules. He said it was out beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic, which was a true ocean. Somewhere far out there was this empire of Atlantis, and you could hop from island to island and reach an opposite continent, which is a really interesting hint for us. The Americas have to have been the opposite continent. Plato said that in roughly 10,000 BC, 9600 BC to be more precise, that a disaster occurred on the island of Atlantis, destroyed it, and basically sunk it. He said that the disaster occurred because the Atlanteans got greedy. They wanted to rule the world, and they attacked the entire Mediterranean with the idea of basically enslaving everybody inside the Straits of Gibraltar or in all the Mediterranean lands. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of the whole story.
Now,
mainstream archaeologists don't believe the story. They think it has no basis in truth, that Plato made it up to try and teach the Greeks a lesson. But there are many people that believe the story is based upon factual events.
Now, I know you spoke of chariots and elephants and all that, but how far advanced do you think that these, I guess you would call them Atlanteans, correct?
Yes, yeah, they'd be Atlanteans.
Okay, how far advanced do you think they were? I mean, could they fly? Anything like that? And when you talk about disasters, that kind of makes me think, Fukushima, something like their own destruction. When you say destroyed, how cataclysmic are we talking?
Well, what if you actually read Plato, what he says in that section, very few people really get this when he talks about how it got destroyed. It was caused by heavenly bodies, and he said that routinely in the Earth's history, long in the past, that bodies that rotate around the Earth, he said there were many bodies in the heavens that rotated around the Earth, and that at periodic times, some of these bodies would interact with the Earth and cause massive destructions. And they were so big, these destructions by fire and water were so big that nobody could remember it afterwards, and that this happened over and over again, and that the destruction of Atlantis was just the most recent one of these. So imagine a meteorite or a comet that comes in, that the idea now is that it was a comet, a large comet that came in and actually struck in the Atlantic and hit South America and parts of the Caribbean and so on. There's evidence of this. It's called the Carolina Bays event in America. But around 10,500 BC, they know that something did in fact happen, and that it created massive firestorms and tsunamis. So, and coincidentally, that was the end of the last ice age. And at the height of the last ice age, which is around 20,000 years ago or so, the height of the last ice age, the sea levels were 300 feet lower than today because so much ice was in the polar caps. Right. That ice slowly and surely melted, and it raised the sea levels up, and that would submerge land. The main destruction was by this impact, at least according to Plato. He doesn't call it a comet. He doesn't call it a meteorite. He talks about these heavenly bodies moving around.